I've been thinking about this whole Kabisado ordeal, which is a very nice song, by the way. Kudos to Blaster and For Spades. There's a recent comment by um, a student of mine. She said, "Sino naman kasing hindi mahulog sa taong kabisado ka?" Which posits a lot of ideas from whatever that means. There's something really quite dangerous about being known, if you know what I mean. Not the service level kind of knowing the favorite color, the go to coffee order, or the birthday you can pull up from a calendar. I mean, it's the kind of knowing that doesn't need asking. The kind that notices the pause before you answer, the shift in your tone when you say okay, the way silence stretches longer when something is wrong. And lately, this idea has been echoing everywhere, especially with the Kabisado making rounds on TikTok. Like, suddenly timelines are filled with fragments of people saying the same thing in different ways. Like, hey, kabisado na kita, and like, this is the kind of love that you would want to portray or you would want to experience in a way. And sometimes it's quite astonishing, but at the same time, it can also be very, very dangerous, like I said. You know, we tend to romanticize the idea of being known so deeply that we forget to ask to what end. Because it is this new language, or in this new language of modern relationship, you can be understood without being claimed. You know what I mean? You can be seen without being chosen. You can be memorized and still be temporary. And that's the quiet tension behind the trend. Because if you really listen closely, this isn't typically how a love story would start. Not entirely. It sounds like one at first. That familiarity, that ease, that soft certainty of being understood without explanation. It feels like love because it carries the language of intimacy. But stripped down, and what remains is something more unsettling. It's the story about attachment without direction, about closeness without clarity, about people who learned each other deeply but never really decided what to do with that knowing. And that's why it probably lingers. You know, we live in a world that constantly asks us to curate ourselves, to be palatable, some sort, to present versions that are easier to understand, easier to like, easier to leave. But there is a quiet rebellion in being with someone who refuses the edited version of you, right? Someone who insists on knowing the unfiltered draft about you, someone who remembers. They remember how you take your coffee not because it's routine, but because they've watched you choose it on days when you were okay and on days that you weren't. They remember the things you said that you didn't mean and the things that you meant but couldn't say. They remember the contradictions and do not ask you to resolve them. They just hold all of it. But here's the part where we're only starting to admit being known is not the same as being loved properly. Because when someone loves you like that, right? Or when someone knows you like that, they don't just understand your joys. They learn your breaking points. They know what makes you stay and they know what makes you leave. They know how to reach you. And sometimes they still choose not to stay. So falling isn't just about this sort of affection, it's about interpretation. We mistake familiarity for intention, we mistake consistency for commitment, we mistake being known for being chosen. And I think that's why the trend hits so hard nowadays, especially in this era of situationships, because it names something a lot of people have lived through but never really quite articulated. The ache of being deeply understood by someone who never intended to keep you. And maybe that's the real revelation here in the song Kabisado. It isn't a love song per se. It's sort of like a mirror, right? A reflection of how easily you attach meaning to familiarity, of how you fill in the gaps between, oh, they know me, they must love me, as if these two can be interchangeable, and of how we stay in that space that feel like love even if they refuse to define themselves as such. Because being known feels like enough until it isn't. Until you realize that no matter how well they've memorized you, they never chose to say for the long story. Only the excerpts of you, only the parts that were convenient, and only the version of you that existed with their comfort. And suddenly the question changes. It's no longer just sino namang hindi mahuhulog sa taong kabisado ka. It becomes, bakit ako nahuhulog sa taong kabisado ako pero hindi ako pinipili? And at the end of the day, maybe this was never really about love in the way we wanted it to be. Maybe it's always about the illusion of it, the closeness that almost meant something, the familiarity that felt like home but never really meant to be one. And maybe the hardest truth to sit is this: someone can know you by heart and still not have the heart to love you the way you deserve. But at the end of the day, it's how we choose to be that person, right? So if may kabisado kang tao, might as well admit that you love them. But be wary, some people can never recover from that. So I guess it's up to you. Stream yan yung Kabisado by Four of Spades. Until the next video, I guess.